Hey everyone, welcome to Conflict Tales. Get ready for another unbelievable story filled with drama and unexpected twists. I woke up to the sound of sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through my bedroom window, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The acrid smell of smoke filled the air, and my firefighter instincts kicked in before I even had time to fully register what was happening. I threw on a jacket and rushed outside. 2 houses down, flames were devouring the front of a single-story home. Firefighters were already on the scene, spraying water as thick black smoke billowed into the night sky. The owner, a frail-looking elderly man named Mr. Caldwell, stood in his driveway, wrapped in a blanket, staring at his burning house with wide, vacant eyes. The neighborhood had gathered, murmuring among themselves, whispering theories about how it started. Standing at the edge of the crowd, I noticed my neighbor, Karen. Arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line, she was whispering something to another neighbor, shaking her head. Even in the middle of a crisis, she looked impeccably put together. Her blonde bob curled just right, her floral blouse spotless. But there was something off about her expression, something too rehearsed, too controlled. My gut told me to watch her. I had moved to this quiet little neighborhood only 3 months ago. After 20 years as a firefighter, I had been forced into early retirement due to an injury. A fractured leg and too much scar tissue in my lungs meant I wasn't fit for the job anymore. I thought this place would be peaceful. I was wrong. Karen had made it her mission to make my life a living hell since the day I moved in. It started with passive-aggressive comments about my front lawn not being neat enough for the community standard. Then came the complaints about the strange people visiting my house, old friends from the firehouse who she decided looked suspicious. When none of that worked, she started filing official complaints, noise violations, despite me barely making a sound past 8 p.m., accusations that I was running an illegal business from my garage, which was actually just me restoring an old truck. Tonight, though, I had bigger things to worry about than Karen's latest scheme. As I watched the firefighters battle the flames, my old instincts took over. Even from a distance, I could tell something was off. The way the fire spread, the way it consumed only certain areas. It wasn't normal. An electrical fire would have started from inside. A gas leak would have triggered an explosion. But this looked deliberate. I stepped closer, scanning the scene. The front door was almost untouched, but the windows had shattered outward, meaning the heat inside had built up too fast. A flashover. Someone had either poured an accelerant or set multiple points of ignition. I had seen too many of these cases during my career to ignore the signs. The fire chief, a guy named Dawson, noticed me watching. He gave me a nod, recognizing me from back in my firefighting days. "Roberts, you see what I see?" he muttered under his breath as he joined me on the sidewalk. I nodded. "Yeah, this isn't an accident." His jaw tightened. "We're calling in an investigator, but it's looking bad. No sign of forced entry. The old man says he was asleep when it started." I glanced at Caldwell, still in shock. He was clutching a steaming cup of coffee someone had given him, eyes glassy. Something about this felt too convenient. Karen was still talking in hushed tones with another neighbor, throwing occasional glances in my direction. My stomach twisted. She had a habit of inserting herself into everyone's business, but this time, it felt different. I didn't know why yet, but I intended to find out. Over the next few days, the fire was ruled suspicious but undetermined. The official report claimed that without conclusive evidence of arson, they couldn't point fingers. But I knew better. Fires like that didn't just happen. That's when things started getting weirder. The morning after the fire, I found a pile of broken glass in my driveway, too much to be accidental. A day later, someone left a dead rat on my porch. Not exactly a subtle message, and then the whispers started. Neighbors began looking at me differently. Some barely made eye contact when I walked past. Others muttered things under their breath, phrases I barely caught. Troublemaker, not safe, bringing bad people around. Karen had been busy. I had a feeling she was spreading rumors, but I couldn't prove it. Yet. Then, one evening, I caught her son, Tom, lingering near my garage. He was 19, awkward, always looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't. That night, he looked especially nervous. "You need something?" I asked, stepping onto the porch. He flinched. "No, I mean, yeah, kinda. Just forget it." He turned to leave, but something in his body language stopped me. "Tom," I said, keeping my voice calm, "if you know something, you should talk to someone." His face twisted like he was struggling with something. Just be careful, okay?" he muttered before rushing off. That wasn't exactly reassuring. The next morning, my mailbox was torn off its post. My truck's tires were slashed, and just as I was about to call the police, I found a note taped to my front door. "Leave, or you'll burn next." I exhaled slowly, my pulse steady despite the anger building in my chest. Someone wanted me gone. Someone who thought fear would work on me. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I was done ignoring this. It was time to fight back. The next morning, I took my time inspecting the damage. The mailbox was torn clean off, its wooden post snapped in half like a toothpick. My truck's tires were slashed with precise, deliberate cuts. Whoever did it knew exactly how to cause the most damage. The note on my door fluttered slightly in the morning breeze, its words still fresh in my mind. "Leave, or you'll burn next." I wasn't going anywhere. I took photos of everything, documenting every angle before heading to the police station. Officer Green, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a perpetually tired expression, took my statement. He barely looked up from his notepad as I described the escalating harassment. "No witnesses?" he asked. "Not unless you count the person who left the note," I said dryly, "and I have a strong feeling Karen's involved." At that, he did glance up. "Karen Reynolds?" I nodded. He sighed. "We've had complaints about her before, but nothing ever sticks. She's careful. Knows how to toe the line just enough to avoid legal trouble. Yeah, well, someone's trying to scare me off, and I doubt it's a coincidence that it started right after that fire." Green pursed his lips. "We'll look into it. That was cop speak for we'll file a report and nothing will happen." On the way home, I stopped by the hardware store to pick up a new mailbox post and a set of security cameras. If the cops weren't going to do anything, I'd gather my own evidence. By the time I finished installing the cameras, the sun had started to dip below the horizon. I sat on my porch, sipping a beer, scanning the street. That's when I saw him. Tom, Karen's son. He stood at the edge of my property, shifting from foot to foot like he was debating something. I set my beer down and walked toward him. "Something you want to tell me?" His shoulders tensed. He glanced around, lowered his voice. "You shouldn't have gone to the cops." My pulse quickened. "Why?" He swallowed hard. "She's not going to let this go. You don't know what she's capable of." I narrowed my eyes. "Are you saying she's the one who did this?" His hesitation was answer enough. Before I could press further, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Tom, get inside." Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, her face a mask of controlled fury. Tom flinched, throwing me a guilty glance before jogging back to his house. I exhaled slowly, my eyes meeting Karen's across the distance. She held my gaze for a second too long before turning sharply and disappearing inside. That night, I barely slept. Every noise outside had me checking the cameras. At around 2 a.m., a motion alert buzzed my phone. I checked the feed. A shadow moved near my truck. I zoomed in, pulse hammering. The figure was dressed in black, hood up, face obscured. They were crouched low, fiddling with something near the back tire. Enough was enough. Grabbing a flashlight and a bat, I slipped out the back door and circled around quietly. The moment I got close enough, I flipped on the flashlight. "Hey!" The figure bolted. I lunged after them, but they were fast, sprinting across the street and disappearing between houses. I caught a glimpse of something as they ran. Something familiar. A glimpse of blonde hair under the hood. Karen? I clenched my jaw. I needed proof. And now I was going to get it. The next day, I took the footage straight to Officer Green. He watched it with a frown, leaning in closer to the screen. "Hard to make out," he muttered, "but it's definitely someone messing with your truck. I need more than a blurry video." I scoffed. "So I should just wait until my house goes up in flames?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I'm not saying it isn't suspicious. But without a clear ID, without an actual crime caught on tape, my hands are tied." I took the drive back home, frustration boiling under my skin. If the cops weren't going to help, I needed another plan. That evening, I knocked on Tom's window. He hesitated before sliding it open. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "I need answers," I said, keeping my voice low. Tom shifted, looking over his shoulder as if expecting his mother to burst in. "I don't know anything." "I don't believe that, Tom. You tried to warn me last night. That wasn't nothing." He hesitated, then sighed. "She's scared of you. Thinks you're going to expose something. That's why she wants you gone." My stomach twisted. "Expose what?" But Tom shut the window before answering. I spent the rest of the night going over every interaction I'd had with Karen, every odd moment, every veiled threat. Something wasn't adding up. Then I remembered the night of the fire, how Karen had been whispering to a neighbor, how she had looked just a little too calm. My instincts screamed that this wasn't just about a property dispute or neighborhood gossip. Karen was hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was, no matter what it took. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. The caller ID flashed Officer Green's name, and a heavy feeling settled in my gut before I even answered. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Someone broke into your truck last night." The words sent a fresh wave of anger through me. I already knew about the attempt, but hearing it confirmed by the police made it feel more real. I got dressed quickly and headed outside. The air was crisp, the sun barely cresting over the rooftops. My truck sat in the driveway, untouched from what I could see. But the security footage from the night before told a different story. Green stood next to his squad car, arms crossed, watching me as I approached. We reviewed the footage together. The figure was still too blurry to identify, but the way they moved, the way they crouched near my rear tires, told me this wasn't some random vandal. This was targeted. "You got enemies I should know about?" Green asked, eyes narrowing. I exhaled, shaking my head. "Just one. Karen Reynolds." He let out a short breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I'm not saying she's innocent, but you need more than a gut feeling to pin this on her. We need solid proof." I clenched my jaw. I already knew that, but proof was exactly what I was working on. Later that afternoon, I did what I should have done weeks ago. I started talking to the neighbors. Most of them kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact, afraid to get involved. But then there was Mark. He lived 2 houses down and had always been friendly enough, though I got the feeling he preferred to keep his distance from drama. When I knocked on his door, he hesitated before stepping outside, glancing over his shoulder as if checking to see if anyone was watching. "I heard about your truck," he said, voice low. "That's not the first time something like that's happened." My eyebrows lifted. "You mean?" He nodded, arms crossed tightly. "Karen's had it out for people before. You're not the first neighbor she's run out of here." My stomach twisted. I leaned in slightly. "Tell me everything." Mark hesitated before continuing. "There was a family that lived where you do now, about 2 years back. Good people. But Karen decided they were a bad influence on the neighborhood. Started with the same stuff you're dealing with now. Complaints, false reports, little acts of vandalism that never got traced back to her. Eventually, they left. Sold the house at a loss just to get away from her. That confirmed what I already suspected. She had a pattern, and I was next on her list. That night, I stayed up watching the security feeds, waiting for another sign that whoever was behind the break-ins and threats would make a mistake. And just past midnight, movement near my fence caught my attention. A shadowy figure moved swiftly, crouching low as they crept toward my back porch. My pulse quickened. This time, I wasn't just going to watch. I grabbed the baseball bat I had kept by the door, quietly unlocked it, and stepped outside. The night air was sharp and still. My footsteps were nearly silent as I crept toward the side of the house. Then, just as the figure reached for something on my porch, I flicked on the flashlight. "Hey!" The intruder spun around, and for a split second I saw their face. My breath caught. It wasn't just some random thug. It was Tom, Karen's son. His eyes widened in sheer panic before he bolted, sprinting across the lawn and disappearing into the darkness before I could stop him. I stood frozen, the pieces clicking together in my head. Tom had been trying to warn me before, but now I needed to find out just how deep he was in all of this. And why? Because something told me this was bigger than just a grudge. The next morning, I replayed the footage over and over again. Tom had been trying to steal something from my porch. But what? I went outside to check, scanning every inch of the wooden planks. Nothing seemed out of place. Then I noticed it. One of the security cameras had been tampered with, its angle slightly shifted. He hadn't been trying to steal something. He had been trying to disable my surveillance. My pulse quickened. That meant Karen knew I had evidence, and she was trying to erase it. Determined, I backed up all the footage to an external hard drive and hid it inside my house. Then I took a copy to the police station. Green wasn't thrilled to see me again so soon, but when I played the footage, his expression hardened. That's enough to bring him in for questioning. But without proof that he was acting on someone else's orders, it won't stick. I exhaled sharply. That wasn't good enough. I needed to make Tom talk. And I knew exactly how to do it. That evening, I waited outside his house. I knew Karen wasn't home. Her car was gone and the lights inside were off. After about 20 minutes, Tom stepped out, hands shoved in his hoodie pockets. I intercepted him before he could reach his bike. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. He tensed. "I don't know anything." I crossed my arms. "You wouldn't have been sneaking around my house last night if that were true." His face paled. I sighed. "Look, Tom, I know your mom's behind this. I just need to know why. What's she trying to hide?" For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he swallowed hard. "You should leave this alone. It's bigger than you think." My heart pounded. What does that mean? But he just shook his head and hurried away. I watched him disappear down the street, my mind racing. This wasn't just about petty neighborhood disputes anymore. Karen was hiding something, and Tom knew exactly what it was. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was being watched. Maybe it was paranoia, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't taking any chances. I checked the security cameras first thing. The footage showed nothing unusual, just the quiet street, the occasional car passing by, and a few early risers out for a morning jog. But something still felt off. Determined to get answers, I decided to confront Tom again. He was hiding something, and I needed to know what it was. Around noon, I saw him walking back from the grocery store, a plastic bag dangling from his fingers. I intercepted him before he reached his driveway. "We need to talk." His eyes darted around like he was expecting someone to jump out and stop him. "I told you to leave this alone," he muttered. I crossed my arms. "And I told you I'm not going anywhere." "What does your mom have on you?" He hesitated, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Then, under his breath, he whispered, "It's not just her." That sent a chill down my spine. I leaned in slightly. "What do you mean? Who else is involved?" He clenched his jaw, looking torn between fear and frustration. Before he could answer, the sound of a car door slamming shut made him jump. Karen's SUV had just pulled into the driveway. She stepped out, her face a mask of barely concealed anger. Tom, inside. Now. He didn't argue. Just gave me a final desperate look before disappearing inside. Karen turned her gaze on me, and for the first time, I saw something more than just irritation in her expression. It was warning. "Stay away from my son," she said in a low, measured voice. "If you know what's good for you, you'll drop whatever ridiculous conspiracy you think you're unraveling." I held my ground. You don't scare me, Karen." Her lips curled into something resembling a smile, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Good. That'll make this more interesting." She turned on her heel and walked inside, slamming the door behind her. That night, I doubled down on security. I repositioned the cameras, installed extra locks, and even set up a motion sensor by my back door. I wasn't about to let my guard down. Around 3 a.m., the alert on my phone went off. Someone was outside. My heart pounded as I pulled up the camera feed. A shadowy figure was creeping along the side of my house. I grabbed the baseball bat and moved quietly toward the back door, peering through the small window. The figure was hunched over, fiddling with something near my basement window. Then I realized what they were doing. They were trying to break in. I yanked the door open and stepped out. "Hey!" The figure jerked upright and bolted. I took off after them, my adrenaline spiking. They were fast, but I had the advantage of knowing the terrain. I chased them through my yard, over the fence, and into the neighboring property. Just as I was gaining on them, they made a sharp turn and disappeared into the darkness. I stopped, chest heaving, scanning the area. The only thing left behind was a torn piece of fabric caught on a fence post. I picked it up. It was dark, heavy material, not something a random trespasser would wear. This was planned. The next day, I decided it was time to take a different approach. If Karen and whoever else was involved thought they could intimidate me into leaving, they were in for a surprise. I started digging. I went through old neighborhood records, news archives, anything that might hint at a deeper connection. And then I found it. A real estate transaction from 5 years ago. The house I was living in had changed hands under suspicious circumstances. The previous owners had left in a hurry, selling it at a loss. The same thing had happened to another house on the block 2 years before that. And guess who had been listed as a witness in both cases? Karen Reynolds. This wasn't just about me. Karen had a pattern, and I was going to find out exactly what game she was playing. I spent the next day digging deeper into Karen's past. The real estate transactions weren't just a coincidence. Every few years, a house in the neighborhood would go up for sale under strange circumstances. Owners would leave suddenly, selling at a loss, sometimes even abandoning the property outright. And each time, Karen had been involved in some way. A witness, a complainant, a concerned neighbor filing reports. The pattern was undeniable. I needed more than circumstantial evidence. I needed someone who had been through it. After hours of searching, I found an old email thread buried in a local community forum. A man named Richard Lorne had lived in my house before the last owners. His final post had been a warning. "If you live on Oak Ridge Drive, beware of Karen Reynolds. She will make your life hell until you leave." His account had been inactive ever since. I tracked him down to a small town a few hours away and gave him a call. At first, he was hesitant to talk, but when I mentioned Karen's name, there was a long silence on the other end. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I should have burned that house down before I left." That evening, Richard and I met at a diner just outside town. He looked older than his years, stress lines deep around his eyes. Over coffee, he told me everything. The same harassment, the same false accusations, the same escalating acts of vandalism. She'd spread rumors that his wife was cheating, accused him of stealing from neighbors, even tried to get their daughter expelled from school by planting stolen property in her locker. "She enjoys the power," he muttered. "It's not just about getting rid of people, it's about breaking them." I asked if he had any proof. He shook his head. "That's the thing, she never does anything herself. She manipulates, gets others to do her dirty work. You think she slashed your tires? Doubtful, but she knows who did. That was the missing piece. She wasn't working alone. She was orchestrating everything, pulling strings from the shadows. When I got back home, I found my mailbox smashed again. This time, a single white envelope was taped to my door. No threats, no warnings. Just a single printed message. Last chance. Leave. I walked inside, locked the door, and made a decision. I wasn't going anywhere. Instead, I set my own trap. If Karen thought fear would work, she was about to learn otherwise. I installed 2 additional hidden cameras in places no one would think to look. I left my truck in the driveway with the hood popped, as if I was working on it. I kept my lights off earlier than usual. I wanted them to think I was asleep. At exactly 2:43 a.m., my phone vibrated with a motion alert. I looked at the live feed and saw them. 2 figures creeping toward my garage. One of them was Tom. The other was a man I didn't recognize. They were carrying something heavy. A gas can. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and stepped outside before they had a chance to act. "Drop it." Tom froze. The man with him turned and bolted without hesitation, disappearing into the night. Tom, however, stood rooted in place, shaking. I stepped closer. "You don't have to do this. I know she's making you." His face crumpled. "She'll ruin me if I don't." "She's already ruining you," I said, "but it's not too late to stop." He hesitated, then slowly set the gas can down. "I can't. His voice cracked. "She'll destroy me. Not if we destroy her first." The next morning, I handed all my evidence over to the police. The footage, the threats, the vandalism. More importantly, Tom gave a full statement. He admitted to everything. Karen had orchestrated it all. The threats, the damage, even the fire that had nearly killed Mr. Caldwell. By the end of the week, Karen Reynolds was in handcuffs, her reign of terror over. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak came forward with their own stories. The truth finally came out. She had spent years manipulating, controlling, forcing people out of their homes for reasons only she knew. Maybe it was about power, or maybe she just enjoyed watching others suffer. It didn't matter anymore. She was done. As I watched the police take her away, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace.